Hello, my socially responsible and ever-evolving tribe, and welcome to Rewoke, Rewriting Our Kids' Education podcast. My name is Michelle Person, and we are on our journey. We are rethinking, re-examining, and re-educating ourselves and our children. Last week, we talked about being woke in the classroom, what it looks like, what it doesn't look like, and how to advocate for one at your child's school. This week and for the next few weeks, we will be digging into specific subjects at school: reading, writing, math, social studies, the arts. What does it mean to be woke in all of these subjects? This week, what does it mean to be woke in reading class? What tools do you need to support your woke reader at home? Our guest today is a master reading teacher, Andrea Bazemore. She is a woman who became so frustrated with the lack of representation in our schools and the very rigid traditional ways in which she was being forced to teach that she started her own school. My favorite quote from Frederick Douglass is, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." How free are you? How free are our kids? And oh yeah, are you woke? We know injustice exists in the world. We know it permeates every aspect of society, including education. Last week, we talked about how it impacts the overall classroom setting. And this week, we are specifically looking into how it impacts reading instruction. My guest, Andrea Bazemore, is here to talk about what solid instruction looks like so you can spot it when you see it and demand it when you don't. Andrea, thank you so much for stopping by and talking to our listeners about what great reading instruction looks like.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Can you give the listeners a little bit of more background about who you are and how you started?
Sure. I am Andrea Bazemore. I own the Black Apple Virtual School, as well as the Black Apple company. The Black Apple Virtual School is a virtual school that's for K through ninth grade. We teach all the core subjects: reading, math, science, and social studies, and we also teach subject interest-based teaching, similar to like eclectic homeschooling. Eclectic homeschooling is letting kids focus on what they want to learn and teaching them through that. So that's a little bit of what I do. I have taught for 7 years. This is my second year owning a school and teaching for K through ninth grade. But we've got really great success rates, closing on about 4 years of reading and math growth during the pandemic. So just really thankful to be here.
Well, that's amazing. Talk to me a little bit about what it was like to be a teacher very early on in their career and make the decision, you know what, this isn't working. I'm going to start something different. I want to start my own. I think it's important to hear what led you to deciding to start your own school.
Yeah, so I've always been very entrepreneurial. Even when I was younger, I would play dentist at school, and actually, like, I would charge kids to pull their teeth out in first grade, and I would charge them a quarter, and I would pull four people's teeth out Monday through Thursday, and Friday I would buy an ice cream, which is $1. So that was literally my first business in first grade, and I got in trouble for it. But I've just always kind of looked for the second way, looked to go against the grain. I come from a long line of educators, and so basically I knew that I was going to do something different when I was starting to utilize like hip hop in education, remixing, songs very similar to like what you see on like TikToks and things like that before they went viral or anything. But I just felt a really big connection with teaching. I still talk to my first class ever. Some of them are actually my students now in my own school, which is pretty cool. And uh, my second year of teaching, I had the exact same, testing rates as 20-year teachers. And so I knew I was doing something right. And I knew if in my second year, I could get those scores, well, what's to say what happens next? So I just started doing things that were different in school and started getting really high test scores. And then the pandemic came and I was like, well, it's either now or never. And so I chose now.
I completely understand that. I made a lot of during the pandemic that I was like, you know what, it's now or never. So that's an amazing journey that you've had there. You spoke to the fact that you were able to, with the way in which you approached learning, the different things that you implemented, that you were seeing scores and gains, particularly in reading and math, that veteran teachers who had been learning their craft for years and years were just now approaching. So can you talk to the listeners about what does good reading instruction look like? How did you get those great reading scores?
So good reading instruction really takes place with the foundation of phonics. I found that out at a unconference event for Black teachers. It was I was teaching third grade at the time, and it was really the first time that I could network with high school teachers and pre-K teachers, and I was seeing high school teachers not know how to teach their 9th and 10th graders how to read because they had gaps, and I had seen in my third grade students not know how to read, and so I realized that the really big, missing point was pre-K and kindergarten instruction, pre-K, kinder first and second. So I really wanted to focus on those years and figure out why are we failing so much in those key areas. And a lot of it is not understanding how phonics works. Now, about, 2008, New York City Public Schools got with Lucy Calkins and kind of did away with phonics instruction. And that kind of led to the history of a huge gap of kids not learning how to read very well. And we now know that data is really faulty. Lucy Calkins that data does not work. What works is phonics. So any good reading program is going to start out with a very, very strong phonetic program. So understanding what letter sounds are, what 3 letters, a CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant, how that makes a word, and then getting into harder diagraphs and knowing those phonics rules. All of my kids who are learning to read know the phonetics rules and know which words are obviously sight words and what words they can sound out. So that allows them to be really great readers.
It is so funny when you were saying, when you mentioned first off Lucy Calkins, because I'm definitely familiar, and then when you mentioned the phonics debate, like I have to say it was before even 2008. I remember when I was and I'm a little bit older than you. I actually have the paper that I wrote in undergrad when I was advocating.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I wrote it in probably my senior year, so it was about 2000. And there was a huge raging debate at the time that I was entering education about phonics versus whole language. And Lucy Calkins essentially is kind of a whole language proponent. And what that means is, parents, if you're not familiar, is that you can like teaching children reading by breaking down the sounds and teaching them each individual sound and then teaching them the rules for putting those sounds together versus the idea that children will learn how to read by just being exposed to it and they'll pick it up organically. And so, there was there's a huge debate, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I agree with Andrea. One of the things that what they have found is particularly for our children, if you don't give them that systematic phonics instruction, they are not, because our speech pattern is different. Our informal, relaxed speech pattern is very different than our Caucasian brethren. And because of that,
Right.
the rules, we don't pick them up as easily. The rules, we don't, because we
Correct.
don't speak that way. So if you want us to be able to read books the way that they are written and not the way in which we speak, you have to make sure you explicitly teach us the rules. And a lot of these programs had done away with, like Andrea mentioned, strong core phonics programs. And so I'm so glad to hear you. First off, I'm so glad to hear someone that is Teach for America, fellow Teach for America alum, who is also of a little bit younger generation, recognize the importance of phonics, because you see that. So I'm so happy to hear that shift is happening for some of us in education. But also,
absolutely,
yes, that you're using it with your students. So parents, you might be in a school where you hear your child's teacher talk to you about Readers Writers Workshop, or and all the work and the Daily Five. Those are very popular programs that are in some of our traditional public schools. Do your research, Google those terms, the Daily Five, Readers Writers Workshop, and make sure you're asking your teachers, this is great. What are you doing to supplement to make sure they're having strong phonics instruction? That's a recommendation that I would have as you're looking for those instructional strategies that produce strong readers with our children. Andrea, I'm going to ask you, what 3 things do you think what are the top 3 things that a teacher who instructs a diverse group of kids, meaning mostly Black and Brown learners, what are the top 3 things that you think a teacher should be doing if that is your primarily class makeup?
Yeah. So the first thing that I tell teachers to do to get is contact your district to make sure that you guys have RAS Kids. So RAS Kids is a program.
Say that one more time. Contact RAS Kids.
RAS Kids, RAZKIDS.
Yep.
So RAS Kids is a program that I use in my school. I've actually bought the curriculum myself when my district didn't. So that is the number one thing that is going to allow for you to have access to not only just books in English books in all different types of languages. So we use RAS Kids for our foreign language at our school. But it will give kids decodable readers that will allow them to read at their individual level, pre-K through about 5th or 6th grade. And so what that does is it allows you to start at the beginning at very like pre-reader books, the kind of books, Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill type books, rhyming. They've also got folktale books as well. But the reason why I say go to RAS Kids is because that will last you the duration of a child's reading development, especially if they're younger. They do a really good job with culturally responsive teaching. So earlier on, when you were getting books that your kids were just learning to read, they probably didn't have a lot of characters that looked like them. Didn't have characters that were doing activities that reflected what kids wanted to do. But RAS Kids does a very good job at making sure that their materials are really culturally relevant and responsive and reflective of our kids' backgrounds. So I definitely have all kids do that. So contact your district. Don't pay out of pocket like I did. Contact your district and tell them that this is what works. So if you're in the classroom, you can print the books. I use it virtually, so I assign my kids books, and it gives everything that I would need. The quiz, it's got the audio. It's the best program on the marketplace for reading education.
I just want to jump in and say, parents, RAS Kids, you can buy it individually if your school doesn't provide it, like she mentioned that she did. You definitely should ask and see if the school provides a subscription. A lot of schools do. The program overall is Reading A to Z. So you can Google readingatoz.com. And RAS Kids, they have a bunch of actually different subsets of the Reading A to Z program. They have RAS Kids, they have Sprout Science Sprout. They have there's a lot there, and she is very right. the diversity has gotten better as the years have gone.
Yes.
So that's definitely a strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're a parent looking to purchase it by yourself, get in with a group of parents. The subscription costs about $120 for a year, but it's very well worth your money. And if funds are limited, go and do a buy-in with a group of people. It's much cheaper that way. So my second recommendation for reading instruction is to make sure that kids reflect themselves in the literature with high quality text. So the difference here is your kids aren't going to fall in love reading with Rod's Kids. It's going to teach them how to read, and then eventually when they get into third grade and learn read to learn, it'll have a plethora of books that are available. But they're not going to fall in love with reading doing this. So I highly recommend getting Kindle Unlimited books. It's $10 for a subscription per month, and you'll actually see with Kindle Unlimited they have a lot of BIPOC authors on a wide variety of topics that kids will get to learn from. Seeing yourself reflected in learning is really important. So when kids see themselves reflected, they want to continue to learn to read and love to read. The earlier kids can see themselves reflected, the earlier they're going to want to love to read.
Yeah, that's 100% the reason that this all started, this podcast, this everything that Just Like Me Presents does. It started out of Just Like Me books, and Just Like Me books started out of my desire to fill the gap, to make sure that there was diverse literature. So in addition to Kindle Unlimited, please 100% go to justlikemepresents.com, click the Just Like Me book section, click the Just Like Me pick section, because we also have a wide variety. I have books that I've written that are on the Just Like Me book section, but like Andrea mentioned, kids need a wide variety of books that they can pick from so they can see themselves represented. And there are a plethora of authors who have written some really great books, all the way from educational to fiction to science related on the Just Like Me pick page, for that same reason, because our kids need options. So I love that. So after we teach them the actual how to read, let's make sure that they know that they see themselves in what they're reading. What's your third takeaway? I'm loving your tips.
My third tip is for kids to find their genre. So I really didn't see myself reflected in literature growing up. But what I did really love were short stories. So Chicken Pursuit for Soul, or whatever it's called, that was like my book in my series growing up reading. And I've always been someone who is really interested in nonfiction and stories and podcasts. And so that is what I naturally gravitated towards. I still today, I'm not a fiction reader. I don't like reading fiction. And that's okay. But allowing kids to find their genre, find their niche, will allow them to develop a better sense of self. A lot of my students really like anime, mangas, and so they created their own anime, their own mangas. And that has allowed them to develop their own sense of community, sense of self. It's not what I would read, but that's okay. It's not always about you. Figure out what your kids love.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because I was actually going to add on, like, it's okay if they don't want to read what you want to read, as long as they're reading.
Yeah.
And I was actually going to bring up the anime books, and some kids really are in the comic books, and some books.
Yeah.
I had a boy in my class who would only read books about football statistics. I didn't care; he was reading.
Yeah, exactly.
So let them read what they want to read, and let them read as much of it as they want. You definitely mentioned Raz Kids as a possible, as a resource / curriculum. Are there any curriculums any other curriculums or that you recommend?
For reading, a really great phonics curriculum that we implement in our school. It's very hard to find because it just discontinued with print. But I'm sure they'll kind of get back in circulation, is Saxon Phonics. Saxon Phonics kindergarten, first and second grade. is probably the best phonics program that I know of off the back of my hand. Reason is they have really great hands-on activities for each, for explaining the different components of phonics. So explaining, why your voice sounds the way it sounds when it makes certain letters, and doing so in a creative, hands-on way. There's no curriculum that I found on the market that does that great of a job with phonetic skills that anyone could pick up and read and instruct their child. So that is my go-to phonics program. Like I said, it's kind of hard to find. You can find it on eBay. They just went out of print, but I'm sure they'll get it back into circulation soon, or just find it at a discount bookstore. They should have at least one of the phonics programs at either first grade or second grade. Kindergarten is the hardest to find, but you can kind of scroll the internet and it's out there.
Okay, that's a great recommendation. Saxon is a big player out there. There are lots of schools that have Saxon math. So and yes, you can definitely find some stuff like you're right, the Saxon phonics is harder, but you never know. If you find on eBay, contact some of the people who are selling some math stuff, and they might have contacts, and maybe they can help you find some Saxon phonics stuff. Are there any free resources that you can recommend for parents?
Yeah, so there's the Florida Center for Research Center. Florida, FCRC. I can't remember what the second C stands for. But if you Google FCRC or Florida Research Center Phonics, there is a whole scope and sequence of free phonics principles that University of Florida created. So they're all hands-on activities that you can print out and do with your kids. It covers everything that you would need to be able to read. So really covering K through second grade skills for being able to teach phonics, and it goes in sequence. So you just print out the next item and you keep moving. I also like to do the literacy first test. You can just Google it, literacy first. I do that assessment with all of my students to see where they are for their phonics skills. So that's where I tell parents to start out with, because if there's a gap in reading, there's probably a gap in phonics. So you always start there. Obviously, your local library is a really great resource. So lots of people always skip on the library, but the library has lots of resources for kids to explore, not only just with reading, but any other resource material that you may need. So always look at what your local library has and see how they can help you out too.
Awesome. Is there a way, if parents want to reach out and learn more about the Black Apple School or ask you more questions, how can listeners get in contact with you?
Yeah, so we're at Black Apple for Ed on all social media platforms. So at Black Apple, those two words, the number 4 and ED for education. You can also email me at Andrea Bazemore at theblackapple.org. Or message me on any of our social media handles. And if I don't run it, someone can get in contact with me and they'll shoot your way to me. So that's probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Parents, I hope you were listening. Educators, I hope you were listening. And because Andrea dropped a lot of nuggets, a lot of great information, a lot of great resources. Thank you so much for your time, Andrea, and we really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
Students with strong reading skills score better in math and science and are 2 times more likely to be college and career ready, meaning they won't have to spend thousands of dollars on remedial classes in their secondary education, and they are significantly less likely to be incarcerated. We know the stats, and now you have some tools in your tool belt to take action so we can change this narrative. Show notes and resources to all the awesome things Andrea mentioned are on our Facebook page, www.justlikemepresents.com. Hop over to the page, Just Like Me Presents, join, and tell us which one of the tips you found most helpful and which one you might like more information about. Share this podcast with other parents and educators in your circle and hit subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. Thank you again to our guest, Andrea Bazemore, for stopping by to chat with us. Join us next week where we'll be talking about woke writing instruction. Reading is only the first step. Our students are being asked to write more and more at younger and younger ages. Next week, we'll be exploring strategies and techniques to help support. Thanks again for listening. And remember, if our children can see it, they can achieve it.